So Eric Chan is an assistant professor of statistics and public policy at Babson College. Eric has had a very extensive career in education and public policy, which I found deeply inspiring. His research focuses on the role that parents and parent-focused interventions can have in children's academic outcomes. He's also very interested in the interplay between residential choice and school choice and other ways that housing and residential decisions interact with education. And he's done this in a number of different ways, including as a teacher himself, as a researcher, and someone who's been impacting policy. So we're really excited to have him here, and he will be leading the discussion between Avinatan and Sylvia from earlier in the day. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that, Red. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Can everybody see my screen, hopefully? Is it? Yeah. Awesome, great. So thank you everyone for just coming to this education keynote panel. It's actually my pleasure to be here and to be invited as a discussant for this pair of great keynote speakers. I first want to thank, obviously, Sylvia and Avinatan for their wonderful and very insightful presentation that spanned, Mexico and Hungary, and I'm American personally, so hopefully I bring more of an American perspective and experience to this conversation to sort of broaden the issues that we're tackling with today. I just want to start off by telling a story from my own personal experience that sort of, I believe, unifies a lot of the themes that we saw from the presentations. And let me actually just speak slower so that the interpreters can catch up. I have a tendency to speak very fast. So let me slow down here. All right. So the story basically starts out with one fact, and that is that I have worked in both public policy realms and in academia, and sort of saw both sides of the coin before. I grew up in Boston, and really, I think this crowd would find this interesting. I was a student in the Boston Public Schools when the Boston Public Schools system changed from the famous or infamous Boston mechanism to the deferred acceptance mechanism in the mid 2000s. And then I ended up being employed. I had a career with them afterwards. And in particular, I was a data analyst there in Boston when the district was in the process of changing school choice policy during the early 2010s. And we found out, well, I found out a few things from various different perspectives through this experience. And the Boston Public Schools held a lot of listening sessions for a lot of different stakeholders, especially parents. And parents, what the district actually found out was that most parents' first concern was not necessarily school choice of any sort. It was actually school quality. How do we actually go to a school near our neighborhood that is of high quality? So most parents weren't necessarily thinking choice. They're like, I'd rather the school here be good rather than having a whole bunch of bad schools and having choice. That's the same as no choice at all. The second thing I found out from an employee's perspective was that most Boston Public Schools employees actually also did not care so much for choice. In fact, the things that were on their mind were things such as how do I allocate resources equitably? How do I allocate funding in such a way that's effective and efficient? How do I have students learn as much as they can? How can I take care of students who are about to drop out? Things like that, right? Those were their concerns, and a lot of it really has to do with the quality of the schools also. Yet, having worked in the data office, we also found out that a lot of researchers really wanted to study school choice, which is not a bad thing in itself. But when you're from the district's perspective, oftentimes when we receive a research application, I would say during that time, 70 or 80% of the applications were trying to study our school choice mechanism or trying to help us with our school choice. and a lot of the employees were sort of overwhelmed by this because they saw firsthand, well, we certainly engage certain researchers on this topic, but it's also difficult for us to have all the research and have all our researchers that are trying to do research with us to be researching school choice. We have a whole bunch of other things that are first, second, third on our list before school choice. And so the story itself sort of ties in some of the themes across Sylvia's and Avinatan's presentations. And the first theme I'm sort of seeing is sort of the connection and tension between both researchers and practitioners. Both are oftentimes reliant on the other, right? So researchers obviously rely on practitioners to collect data of good quality, right? And to share it, right? On the other hand, practitioners are reliant on researchers to do good research so that we can do things like allocate funding effectively and efficiently, right? How do we better do things like that? Yet incentives and interests are not always aligned, right? We as academics, we're looking for tenure. We're looking to push the boundaries on theory. We're looking to push the boundaries in our field so that we can pursue something new, right? Whereas practitioners always deal with the real life consequences of what's actually happening with the students. The second theme is that there's also connection and tension between both the research itself and practice itself, right? So much of our research hopefully has some real life implications. I know Avinatan's fantastic presentation on basically telling us that there's making a small change to this algorithm is going to directly benefit certain types of students, especially those of low socioeconomic status, right? That is a really important point, theoretically. Yet the consequences, the full consequences of these implications are not always clear, right? So for example, it's possible that these students are not always prepared or of high quality enough to do well in college, and maybe they drop out more later, right? Just a hypothesis, but it's possible, right? And so the direction that I want to take this panel is really the question of what are the opportunities for researchers and practitioners to really align for the greater good, to pursue justice and equity and access for all constituents, right? So the first question I'm going to ask here is really trying to get at the difference between sort of Avinatan and Sylvia's presentations. So obviously Avinatan showed us a very good example of how a simple change to an algorithm can make a difference in practice. But it's not always necessarily easy for practitioners to implement and policymakers to implement, right? So one of my questions here is what information, especially for Sylvia, I think from your perspective, what information do you think education practitioners need in order to feel comfortable implementing data and models-based solutions to education problems? And also, I would say for Avinatan more so, how much do researchers discuss and think about the practical aspects of these solutions, such as implementability and whatnot in their sort of everyday work? So feel free to comment.
I think this is the question for the coming future. We do need to collaborate, and it's not going to be easy. Decision makers in Latin America, which is the case that I know best, and particularly in Mexico, have been influenced by evidence-based analyses. We have been a part of the OCDE and a part of the World Bank and the IDB. And all of these organizations have illuminated some areas that have led to policies. Not recently, but for quite a few years, these policies were geared at enhancing learning results for all. But they, for many reasons that have been analyzed, evaluations of programs conducted, the results have been very frustrating, very mediocre. If you compare the effort and the investment and the expectations from families and from other interested parties. I think that on the other hand, some research or some researchers have damaged, the public school system and have, why? And I'll go into it in a minute, and have also hurt the teaching professions. Let me just make the case for the standardized testing that we do. And we in Mexico, it hasn't been done, but mainly because of the sanitary crisis in the past 2 years. But it will need to come back. We totally recall. But the typical story was the measurement indicated stagnation and very bad results, especially if we're talking about the highly credible OCDE PISA exam. And the next day, all the press would claim the removal of all the public servants in charge because of their inability to obtain good results and teach, and ministers were separated from their positions, and that was very damaging. But moreover, the recent teacher evaluations, and I was very, very interested in these in Avi's presentation, because it distributes people, and some of that was tried in order to assign promotions to teachers according to merit. For that, we had a very complex system, a very cumbersome process, and incomplete data. But not only that, the process of the application of the exams and the evidence and was impossible because of the system, the data, the systems, and the attitude. Ultimately, the army had to go to some of the states in the Republic and some of the schools in order to be able to apply the online exam. It was a good exam, maybe. Maybe not. But it wasn't totally hateful. I mean, it was kind of okay. There were incidents that were really, terrible, like some teachers who wanted to present the exam being attacked by other teachers that opposed that. Well, what happened? The policy went over the baby with the bath. It will be sometime before we can evaluate again, and it needs to be done, and before we can assign merit-based promotions to teachers. So that's kind of the example. Where is the opportunity? There, as Avinatan has said, we need to have really good information. We need to have really good capacities to simulate, and we need to have credibility, trust, and transparency. So that is the area where I believe that we converge. I don't want to take all the time, so but
let me talk about what Sylvia said about credibility and trust. So here's the story, right? So, I finished my postdoc and I was sure that I'm the smartest person on earth, right? I went for MIT for a postdoc. I probably know everything, right? So I come back to Israel and I'm like, I'm going to change the world. It's going to be much better now. It was like 2000, I came 2010, 2011. I had this idea for how to allocate medical residents, right? So medical interns to hospitals. So it's not exactly the residency, it's like part of the school that they need to do. So, I go to them 2011, I say, guys, I have this amazing idea. Trust me, I've written all these cool papers. You should trust me and do this. And of course, they kicked me out the door because they said, you have no credibility, you have no experience. Why should we listen to you? And then I had an idea which was even worse. In 2012, I went to the Ministry of Health and I told them, look, those idiots in the student body, they don't want to listen to my ideas, but you should listen to me. And here's why. If I am right, if I'm wrong, this class, the class of 2012, will suffer greatly. That's terrible. But if I'm right, you can use these ideas for the next decade, right? So think about it, there's a huge upside. 10 years of a better algorithm, and you're only risking 1 year. And surprise, they also kicked me out the door. Right? They say, it's not just that you're an idiot, you're also immoral. How can you offer such a thing? If the students don't agree, we'll never do it. 2013, I did basically nothing. I just sat under a rock and felt sorry for myself. And then in 2014, I came up with another idea. Basically, what happened was we had like the idea of how to re-implement the psychology match. And then I basically went to all the psychology departments and I told them, look, guys, I have this idea of how to do the psychology match. And they said, do you have any experience? And I said, yes, next year I'm going to do the medical intern lottery. And then I went to the medical students and I told them, look, guys, I have this great idea for the medical intern lottery. Since they're students, they forget. They didn't know I'm an idiot, right? It was a completely new class. So I said, I have this great idea for the medical intern lottery. And they said, you have experience? And I said, of course, next year, I'm going to do the psychology match. It's already done. And then basically each one of them trusted that I have some experience because, I'm working with the other one. And that's how we got it to work. And this is how we started. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, credibility is a problem. They never believe us. They never trust us. But if you go to them and you go with data and you try again and again and again, and you try to convince, in the end, you can do these things. And once you do it once, it's really easier, right? I mean, you do it once, you get credibility, people get to trust you, you can show your success, and you can actually make a difference. So I think that, for me, all the systems that I was privileged to work on, in some sense, were much more gratifying than writing papers. And I urge everybody in this field to go in your environment, in your city, in your country, wherever you are, and try to use these tools to actually make a difference.
Yeah, thank you both for those really interesting answers to my question. I especially, this is great to hear from a sort of a policymaker's perspective, also from about how researchers can be damaging to policy, but also the interchange between how do you gain credibility and trust. I think is certainly something that researchers can sort of take that mindset with them and improve their research also. I don't want to take, there's a lot to unpack there, but I don't want to take up all the time with on this question. So let's move on. The second question I had sort of relates to this theme of data, because in our previous conversations we talked a lot about sort of like just access to data and having access to data. From your respective perspectives, sort of what are the opportunities and challenges you see related to data, whether it's collection, quality, sharing, governance, anything really, that can affect the quality of research that we do, and how do you think we can improve upon these issues?
So I think that data is critical. Data is critical for two reasons. One, because it makes you see that what things actually work in practice and what things don't. And B is because it buys you credibility. Very often what I see is that the policymakers, they're not used to computer science, they're not used to programming, they cannot really process the data the way that we can. So if you come to them with the data and show them, this is actually a really good way to earn their trust. And the real part, and not like the funny story of telling stuff, was actually that in 2014 I had more data, and this is why I could convince them to do stuff. And to me, this is a place where we as researchers should help each other. And whenever somebody designs a market, it's really, really important, A, that you can keep access to the data, and B, that you're in a way where you can share the data with other researchers who want to work with you. And if you go to somebody who's already working with the market and try to work with them and do something together, often you can't just give the data freely to anybody, but you have some ability to collaborate on the data with other groups, with other researchers. And if you do this, this can actually help them jumpstart their research and get them to be more proficient and get them to work. And then they can also go to other markets and actually make a difference. So it's all about us helping each other.
Right. Let me, the thing is that data sets are highly deficient in this country. We have a lot of data, but it's very dispersed and inconsistent. The main source for the past 30 years, which is an advantage, is Form 911. It was previously you filled it out, you filled it out. Everybody received a format and then it returned, and many mistakes were made. But Form 911 reported on each of the schools, teachers, students, some conditions, infrastructure, blah, 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 a number of variables. So that is the basis of the educational data. It also, increasingly, it was some sophistications were introduced to the point where you can identify Indian language speakers, disabled children, and all of that is collected centrally. So you have every year, about 25 million children reported in their schools, which is great. However, the processing is quite another matter. The Ministry of Education publishes some of the tables. More recently, you have some restricted access, but some to the original source. And this source is complemented by other data collection efforts like the census, surveys, and more recently, special purpose data. Now, the problem is to have access to the data. There hasn't been a serious, comprehensive study of the quality of the data. The federal source, which is the one that relies on this 911 form, is different from the data collected by the 31 entities or subnational level authorities. And then you have all kinds of great problems for people like Avinatan to solve, and Eric. There isn't a policy of collection, dissemination, and use. So partial data sets have been enhancing, well, what we know about the system, but you always miss out on Indian children, rural schools, populations that are not served in schools, but in an informal, more community-based type of attention. So yeah, there is critical need to have a good policy, and that should be discussed with users and analysts of those data sets. In the past, those the information on school attendance and who did well and all of that, on school choice possibilities, I understand that very well, were restricted. It was not public until the late 90s, where there was a policy for data transparency and an institute that guaranteed that right of access to public information. But it's not been that long. So my conclusion is that for a dialogue, a productive dialogue between the educational authorities and the analysts and researchers, there needs to be this connection. This bridge is made up of data. So we need to know, we need to determine what kind of data is absolutely essential, what is public, what is the limitation of those data sets, how do you complement the surveys, the special purpose data collection and the census data with the school data. That is discussed, but in certain committees between the census, which is very good in Mexico, with the educational authorities, and it has been discussed over the past decade, we never have concluded. I don't think that we have, there's still a way to go. I mean, there's been advances, but there's still a long way to go, and the voice of the researchers needs to be there. It hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, thank you for that, both of you. Just to add my 2 cents, even here in the US, I once did a research project using excellent data from a school district on their gifted and talented program that connected students for many years. And I was able to measure the impact of a gifted and talented program on students. And unfortunately, when I gave the results to the school district, they actually didn't allow me to publish the results because it didn't flatter them. It wasn't a good look on them. And so I've experienced that on both sides. And it's unfortunate, but it certainly, I think, goes into a lot of the trust really has to be on both sides, right? And I think how do we discuss and have an honest conversation about these things, I think can go a long way between policymakers and researchers, right? Red and the other organizers, is there still time or should we stop here?
I think we should be stopping soon. I think we're running a bit over, if I'm not reading this wrong. Is that correct? I think that is correct. Yeah, I think
we're running about 5 minutes late. If you do want to close out with an extra 5 minutes, we can kind of push everything back a little bit, but not too much.
Okay, sure. I'll take an extra couple minutes then. Just one last question, and I think the key thing that Sylvia's presentation sort of stuck out to me was when she said, but we need to ask pertinent questions. And I think closing out on this note might be great. What would you say are some of the more pressing problems in education that can really benefit greatly from data and models-based solutions in general?
So this is something which, completely, is nothing that I've ever worked on. So I think, I have done very little towards the important problems, but to me, the important problem is actually helping kids when they're there. So instead of like allocating them to the right place, actually allocating additional lessons, additional resources, additional attention to the kids who need it the most, and how to do this allocation in the most efficient and effective way.
Yeah, I would basically agree with that very elegant definition. But I would say that the most important problem that we have in the world, certainly in the Americas, including the US, has to do with including children. They may be in school, but that doesn't mean that they are included. We need to better understand these new generations, and we need to better understand what happened to them during the 17 months of separation from other humans, except their parents. And sometimes that was a very sad experience. So I think that's our challenge. How do you, and this is where the simulation and the power of technology and computer science comes in. How do you serve diversity? What do you factor in? How many ways that derive in new pedagogies, in new schools, in new experiences of teaching and learning can you develop to better serve or to serve appropriately these very hurt, very diverse generations that we don't want to call the generations of confinement or of the COVID-19 generations. We need to bring them out of that possible classification and call them the generation that was served with appropriately because we knew them well and we had the ability to bring solutions to their lives. So that's really our problem.
Yeah, thank you. So with that, I want to thank you both for being a part of this panel, and I thank you for the organizers for just having these wonderful keynote speakers for us to listen to today. So thank you.